Unfiltered, uncensored, and unapologetic. This is the Retail Warzone podcast.
All right, so this evening, I have Adam Mackinnon with us and Trent Mercer. The things that we have in common are we worked for music stores. Trent and I both worked for Guitar Center for several years. Trent finished out his career there as a store manager unceremoniously, unfortunately. And then I also worked with Adam. He was the store manager for the direct competition in the market that we were in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the good and the bad, you know, differences in culture, the different places, you know, we've been, you know, the kind of how we saw the market change and how people, some businesses haven't really had like a forward thinking kind of plan, still rooted in old concepts that, you know, really at this point in time don't work. I will say, Trent, I don't know if you remember, I'm wearing a relic from the past. Laguna Guitar Center shirt.
Laguna.
Yeah. You know, I have so many of these damn shirts. But anyway, what we'll do is first I want to go through both of you, let you give your spiel about, you know, where you worked in music and instant retail. Adam, you do not have to name if you do not want to. You know, how much time you were there or whatnot. And same thing with you, Trent. So go ahead, Adam.
Sure. So yeah, my name's Adam Mackinnon. I was in music retail for a little under 13 or 14 years, depending on how you count it. I began my career at a small operation. If you're in the industry in the top 200, I started off at about 150 or so. A small operation called Accent Music in Delaware. And then I spent about 5 years or so there, and then moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where I worked for Ken Stanton Music for roughly about 7, 8 years, 8 years, something like that. So that is where I came. I was a store manager for all but 1 or 2 of those years that I worked in the industry. And, you know, independent stores. So, you know, nothing corporate, but at the same time, you know, went from like 150 to like, you know, 30 on the top 200. So small and mid-size operations in the family world.
Also, too, I want to throw out that Adam also is the creator and host of a podcast called Romantic About Baseball. And he's also an excellent damn writer. So I have links in the description of the video to his podcast and also to his Substack, where he's going to kind of outline his path through music instrument retail. I highly recommend checking it out because dude can write like ain't nobody's business. I got to give you props there. Great shit. Plus,
thank you. Thank you. There will be more. There will be more coming at some point. I should say I put the first one out and then I got distracted with other work things, but there are more.
Yeah, and plus too, I mean, he's even written training manuals. We'll just leave that for a minute. Trent, your turn.
All right, so my name's Trent Mercer. All my experience in the music instrument retail was at Guitar Center. So I think it was like 2008. I moved from Illinois, where I'm from, to Atlanta. And that was the first job I got down there. It was selling guitars on the guitar floor. So that was interesting for me because I'd never done anything like that at the time. But I really enjoyed it. And, you know, things worked out that I ended up having to come back to Illinois. And I wasn't able to transfer at the time, so I quit, came back to Illinois, and then ended up getting rehired the next year in Peoria. I worked in Peoria from 2009 to 2012. In 2012, I was moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was there from 2012 until December of 2015. And I was moved to Des Moines, Iowa to become a store manager. And that is where my career with Guitar Center came to an end. It was in Des Moines, Iowa.
Sounds like a lovely place. So,
Boy, all the
but-
places I've been,
Yep.
Iowa not my favorite.
So, my spiel was, I was a sales manager for what was affectionately known the Black Pearl, GC 762 in Marietta, Georgia. It was a very bizarre time for me because when I came on board, I had just got done with Hobby Lobby. And it was actually my wife who said, hey, why don't you go do something you might enjoy for a change? Well, there's a novel concept. And she said, why don't you apply for Guitar Center? Now, mind you, I come from the retail world, right? So I show up to drop off my application in like dress pants, a shirt, a tie, doing the whole spiel. And then I get called for an interview. And at that time, our office had a couch in it. And Jay Bell was the store manager, and he calls me in, and I go up there, and I'm dressed like I'm interviewing for some like fucking regular retail interview, and I have to sit on this couch, and he looks at me and he says, well, why Guitar Center? And I was like, why not?
Why?
And his exact comment was, well, you've got a really pretty resume. Are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. So that became, quite the love affair. And I will say, I'm getting old and the dates kind of get lost on me. I do know, I'm thinking at the end of my tenure there, that would be about 12 years ago, because I had a video pop up of where we had these shindigs in our garage, where all the Guitar Center people would come over and we'd drink and grill and play and whatnot. But I'm thinking around 2003, 2004 may have been when I started. I still know my employee number. I was at 054846. But at that point in time, like we were just discussing off camera, Guitar Center was a different beast. And the thing with it was a magical time because Guitar Hero, the video game, was massive. So I wound up working in the store when the business was really, really, really booming. Every kid out there that was playing the video game all of a sudden wanted to become Slash, and their parents were coming in, buying them guitars and whatnot. And also at the same time, Adam, I forgot about this, that was really when Taylor Swift started picking up. So there was a huge influx of females coming in, wanting acoustic guitars. Now, when you want to talk about culture, back then, you got a bunch of guys working in this guitar store, and it was really kind of sad because it was kind of like the cartoon dog with the tongue hanging out, and every girl that walked in, they were kind of,
it's a very predictable
Yes.
group.
And the amount of females who were so pissed off and angry because the sales guys would go in and say, oh, are you looking for a guitar for your boyfriend? And I'm like, no.
It's not patronizing at all.
So that was kind of my gig. I wound up having to move back to South Carolina. I transferred to a smaller store here. And, Adam, as in a small store that has established salespeople, and there's not a lot of volume, there's not a lot of traffic, those people have become somebody's guy. And you just can't weasel your way in there and become the guy. There just wasn't enough to go around. And so I wound up going back to regular retail. So, Adam, for you, kind of give us your perception of the difference between the independent store that you worked at up north and KSM, like difference in culture, things you felt both did good and both did poorly.
Sure. So the biggest difference, first off, is organization. The thing about music retail, and anyone who's worked there will tell you, is that you have to have a strong organization, and that's, to me, the biggest difference from Accent to KSM was that, at Accent, it was very kind of free reign. I mean, I was literally cutting POs and running restock reports and everything within my first month of getting my keys. So it was kind of one of those things where it was almost the virtue of availability when you were there. So therefore you advance. The thing with a store like Accent is that because it's in a small market, it was able to get away with a lot more of that type of thing. It was able to carry smaller brands, run smaller lines, thinner inventory, because you're serving a state with 3 counties in it. The fact is that Guitar Center didn't move into Delaware until 2011, 2012, something like that. Don't hold me to that timeline, but something along those lines. And so there just wasn't a lot out there. So the biggest difference there, when you go from there to say KSM, which is in an ultra competitive market, I had never really worked in a market like that. And the one biggest thing that jumps out at you right away is hierarchy and organization. And when you have those two things in, say, a small store and then like a medium-sized store, that's going to be the hugest difference between those two, because the hierarchy and the organization of it is both a good thing, because you kind of have a roadmap, you kind of know where things are, but it's also your biggest inhibitor, because like you said, you're dealing with organization, but there's always exceptions for this person or that person and this person on that day, and so it's like a small town, but they have you go from one small town where like the cat is a mayor and that's okay, and then you go to another small town where like there's an entire executive branch for 100 people. So that was the biggest difference going from those two places.
Now, Trent, the one thing I want to ask you, I mean, you spent your time at the Black Pearl. You came in under J-Bell, correct?
Sure did.
All right. So tell us all right. So you what the vibe was there. How different was it like in the Atlanta market versus, moving back to Illinois?
It was harder for me in Atlanta, believe it or not, because I had to establish myself. I mean, I didn't, back in Peoria, I was in the music scene. I was playing in bands, playing shows all the time. I knew people. I had connections. You know what I mean? I could have an established customer base from people that I knew that were also musicians. So in Atlanta, it was like, sales was very cutthroat at the time, dude.
Yeah, I'll get into that here in a minute.
Like this was before all the culture shock started happening, so sales was very cutthroat. Like me coming in as a new guy, and especially as an out of towner, like I didn't know anybody there. You know what I mean? I was just like this dude that came walking in one day and interviewed, and you guys were like, "Oh shit, yeah, we'll hire him," and that was. That was it.
Yeah.
But coming in as that new guy, you'd start to make sales, and then all of a sudden, you'd have another sales guy coming up to you like, "Hey man, that's my guy."
Oh yeah. Yeah. We did have that.
Yeah. I know that feeling. Yeah.
And when you're new, you're kind of just like, "Oh, well, okay, I guess I don't know anybody around here. Like, I guess that's his guy. Like, hey, can you put me on the sale for a certain percentage, because we were all on commission?"
Yep.
So
well,
reason. I mean, like you guys were all great. Like I ended up becoming really good friends with a lot of you guys, and Steve, you and I have stayed in touch over the years, really since 2008. That's you know correct. What I mean? So I've developed some really long-term good friendships from people that I worked with there. But that's why it was. I would say it's harder. It was harder for me there because I could come back to Peoria and let like all my people know I'm back.
Right.
And that's what happened when I came back. Like I went back to the Peoria store and just started killing it right away. And I was actually doing better sales wise in Peoria than I did in Atlanta.
Well, Atlanta was rough, and we did have a sales guy that also Adam is very familiar with, Mr. Cheney Brandon. And it was like, look, I'm not gonna lie. It was, if the ranker of sales came out the first day of the month, we would brag because one of us was over Cheney for just that one day. Obviously it was the first day of the month, right?
Yeah, till
and
he popped,
Yeah, and he probably didn't even work that day. And his ass come in there with his little Bluetooth headset. He walking around talking to people. All of a sudden, he's not on the ranker at all. And all of a sudden, he's got like 15 grand. You're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But he was entrenched. I mean, he was a very good drummer, and he had a lot of connections. He did a lot with Seven Dust and obviously Collective Soul and those guys and whatnot. So, he had an end. T-Pain, I remember he was doing a lot with him.
Yeah,
but
I remember that.
Yeah, but the one thing I will say, from a culture standpoint, the one thing that Guitar Center did well at that small window, and this is something that the competitor I felt didn't do at all. Guitar Center, at least in our store and in our district, was way concerned about the vibe in the store. They wanted the customer to walk in and understand that, yeah, we were sales guys or whatever we were doing, but we loved what we were doing. We were having a great fucking time doing it. And they would try to measure that. They really would. It would be like, oh, the vibe feels off. Come on, guys. Let's snap out of it. Whereas in the competition, it was kind of punitive, and there was no free thinking. And there obviously was no having a good fucking time. That just didn't wash. And, but I remember times like at GC where if business was slow and the store was put together fine and whatnot, there'd be a group of us sitting in the middle of the store, like jamming and like doing cover songs because it was part of the vibe. We wanted people to enjoy being there. And just on the record, coming from retail, J Bell used to say, they can say whatever they want to about me, but I hired you. and I was Merch Master Steve, and I'm proud to say my first year there, I actually clocked in $10,000 worth of overtime.
Look, Steve, I will say this. I got complimented in Peoria on my merchandising skills. And I always was like, man, it was this dude, Steve, in Atlanta taught me how to set displays up like this. I always give him credit for that.
Well, it's possible too. I mean, vibe is super important. And, some of that, like a business store, district manager, owner, whatever, they'll tell you, oh, well, you have fun when things are going good. But, I used to argue, and I used to tell my team at the store that I used to run that you eventually took over, Steve, like when we were going good, that's fine. But when we weren't going good, like that was no time to walk away from that. That was, don't let the customer know that things aren't going good. That's when you need it the most. That's when you need the vibe. That's when you need that type of thing. And I think when you're not under like a micromanager or you're not under that watchful eye, it is possible to achieve that. But that's not always the case if you have someone watching.
That's correct. And the one thing I will say about that location, Adam, and this is coming from a business sense. This is coming from managing stores for 20 odd years, right? Is, when I came on board, the volume that place was doing, right? Yeah.
Fractions
honestly,
of what it was.
That entire store could have ran with 2 people working a first shift and 2 people working a second shift, overlap for lunch, and that's it. But when you're required to have your entire staff of 5 to 7 people working on a Saturday, knowing good and damn well it's not going to be that busy, and you've got people walking all over each other trying to get a deal, that is just bad business. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother ball of wax there. I don't know where the discussion's going to go, but that's a whole nother topic in and of itself where, you're managing based on tradition rather than based on, what the business
Correct.
actually needs.
And you were attuned to that. I mean, you knew. I mean, that was the one thing I told you, when I first met you. I mean, you knew what was up, but your hands were tied.
It's being in tune with the thing about when you're in a company that's a little smaller And maybe in a corporate store like Guitar Center, there's probably a different type of position. There's always a link in the chain somewhere that sees the ground level and then gets input from the corporate level. That's the hardest position to be in, because you're keyed in on what corporate wants to do, but you also see and what's happening at the ground level. That was always the toughest thing for me, was always trying to discern like what ownership really wanted, and then try to find a way to dispel, to get that over to the staff that clearly like everybody knew we didn't need to be. Now, when we were going good, when that store was going good, we needed everybody.
Exactly. You did.
But right. Well, the thing was, not every store I went to needed that. So yeah, there was a few phantom sick days that were called in. There was a few, last minute food poisonings or something that happened because, hey, if you didn't want to be there, then I didn't need you there, and
that's the thing to me is I just feel like, it is kind of unfair to judge the two based on the time frames I worked there. I mean, nothing's ever going to hold a candle to that 3 to 4 year window where GC was just firing on all fucking cylinders. I mean, that was madness. I mean, and then to go, to the competition and whatnot and learn real fast that, it's going to be their way or no way. And it's fully understandable. I mean, it's their business. I mean, they can run it exactly how they choose to run it. There is nothing wrong with that, right? But you have to question some decisions and whatnot from just a business standpoint. And the one thing I wanted to talk about that encompasses both places, and I don't know if you did it at Accent, is what Guitar Center called the card file, and what at KSM, getting
the Excel spreadsheet.
Steve,
yes,
the card file ended up becoming a monster that I don't know if you were around for when the sales follow-up system rolled out, but card file ended up becoming this monster of a sales lead program that it honestly was just a nightmare, dude. And it got to a point where we were forcing people to do it because we were being told to force people to do it.
Right. And that's the thing about, I will say when we were at GC, there was some productivity that came with it. I mean, there were some results because you had certain guys, right? But you only had like a handful. That you knew you got this guy who collects like signature guitars, to call that guy, and those worked. But you fast forward to like today, okay, where people are more conscious of their free time and you've got no call lists and things like that. It almost borderlines in harassment because there's a lot of people you wind up calling who may have been in just a couple of times to get some strings or whatnot. And they either A, they're not going to answer the phone, or B, they're going to be like, why the fuck are you calling me? And to me, when you run campaigns like that, and music instrument retail is not the only one, okay? I mean, there's others that do it. It borderlines harassment, and you're interfering with people's personal time. And that is something that I just feel like is archaic and needs to go away.
Well, and not to jump in front here, but like what Hero said in the comments, what did he say here? He said, there seemed to be a lot of, it worked before, no need to reevaluate. That's what all of that is. That's what all of that is. It's kind of like fishing, I guess. Like, I know it's kind of a on the nose analogy, but when you think about it, like they use these programs, like the call out programs, because you'll call out 100 times, but you'll get 2 sales. And the whole premise is like, oh, you wouldn't have gotten those 2 sales if you didn't make those calls. So you're net 2 sales. And what else were you doing at that time? So it's like, music retail in particular, more than other industries, is built on this premise that like, oh, well, if you're not busy right at this moment, You need to be doing something. And if you're not doing, if you're not trying to generate sales on your own, then you're not being active enough. And that's why you don't have the customer base that like Cheney Brandon has. That's why you don't have that customer base, because you're not making phone calls. And it's a false premise. It's a lie.
It is.
It's not true. Yep. It's not true. I can promise you, I was not the best salesman. I kind of had it. I would turn it on when I needed it, but I didn't need to call people to sell, to be top salesman wherever I was. I didn't need to. I did, but I didn't need to.
To your point, it's not about the phone calls. It's about the hustle in the store. I mean, it really is. And it's a skill of knowing how to talk to people and how to lead people to a decision and whatnot. Now, look, I ain't gonna lie, fish out of water trying to sell fucking brass instruments. That was terrible. I hated that. It was like,
that was my favorite, man, because you were damn good at it. You're selling to the mom. Well, you were selling to the parents that had the money in their pocket already. Like,
that's true.
They didn't know the easiest thing about. I will tell you this, and I'm sorry. And again, I feel
go right ahead, bro.
The thing in all of the years that I've done this, I've only ever worked in stores where you had to work every department. I worked at a store that had departments, but I was the manager, so I went to every department. The easiest sales I ever made was in band and orchestra. If you are listening to this and you're currently in music retail and you're not in your band and orchestra department, find a way to get to it, because I'm telling you, it is the easiest way to make sales. You're selling to people. It's kind of like you're selling meat to people who don't know anything about food. Like, they know they need it. They know they need it. You know what I mean? And like, it's expensive, so it must be good. And like, I Googled an article on it, so therefore it must be the right thing. And all you need to do is just validate. Like, yeah, that's the right thing.
Yeah,
that's what you need.
That's very, very fucking well put. And also in the chat, Brent says, if you don't update your business models as customers change habits, you don't have a successful business. Thank you. That is correct. And I will say that both companies were guilty of not changing habits. I mean, they really were. Now, talking about sales, let's talk about sales. Okay, let's give some inner working stuff here for people who haven't shopped. Now, I know at KSM, it was visible, but not like at GC. The whole GC model was, Adam, are you familiar with green screen? Have you heard what green? Okay.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I've heard the horrors of
green screen. If you could navigate it, was like just a wonderful tool. But to you guys out there, I mean, not trying to give out trade secrets, but hey, there's inflation, money's tight. Let's talk. Okay. So at Guitar Center, it was the first place I ever worked in my entire career where at the bottom right hand part of the screen, you could see the store's sales for the day and your profit for the day.
Yeah.
And you learn some amazing things when you start being able to see these numbers in this business. And the one thing about Guitar Center that was great, and Trent, you know this, the employee discount was the bomb. It was awesome. I mean, we even got at 762 for a while, we were able to buy used gear at what we paid for it.
Yeah. That went on for a while, but to what you were saying, that green screen system, if you got to learn it, it was very insightful.
Very. So what happens is, especially back in those days when people are, we had a statement that we used at GC that some sales guys, if they weren't able to close the deal, they would quote unquote drop their pants. And what that meant was they could see in real time what the cost was on the instrument they were selling, what the price was, the GLP, guaranteed lowest price or whatever. And then they get to decide how much they're going to drop that to make the sell. Now, the one thing I will say about GC at that point in time, because it was banging, was there was a lot more anonymity. You did not have to make a phone call like you did at the competition to make a deal. there was a statement that every Saturday J Bell would say, Ted is in the building. And what Ted meant was take every deal. And that's why we did the business that we did. Yeah, there were some guys who couldn't sell very well and that would like drop it down to like, God, like just a hair above cost.
Yeah.
But, you know, there were guys that, you know, perceived value is a big thing. And Adam, you know all about perceived value and trying to sell, you know, this merchandise. And I remember one time getting yelled at. Well, not yelled at. J Bell pulls me into the office and he's like, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, what? He's like, your gross margin is too high. Now, coming from where I came from, walking into this business, I'm thinking, that is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Why are you telling me my gross margin is awful?
You're walking deals.
Exactly.
Steve.
That's what he said.
Deals.
But he realized soon thereafter that wasn't the case because I figured something out. I figured out, Trent, you remember how we cost average strings into the guitar?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're
I've carried with me for years. Dude.
Yeah. So when you're throwing in strings or whatnot, you cost average it into the thing. So, and it doesn't really affect the margin. So for all you people out there that shop this stuff, just know if it's made of wood, if you push hard enough, you can get a deal. If it's electronic, you're shit out of luck.
But I will say that you got to be. Go ahead.
One thing. So that culture of take every deal, you know, when it really was about pushing the sales as hard as you possibly could. And you did have leeway on making deals where regular sales guys could, you know, work out deals with customers on stuff. And you'd pretty much always get it approved. I mean, there wasn't too many times your manager would be like, no.
When did it change?
So I took over in Peoria, I was a salesperson and then an assistant manager. And then at the time, the position was sales and training manager. So I did that in Peoria for a little bit. And then I got moved to Milwaukee for that same position, which eventually ended up becoming customer service manager.
Oh, they changed STM to customer service?
Yes, dude.
Ooh.
And that was about the time when everything started changing because they had already started stamping out the wheeling and dealing culture, right?
Right.
And the old school Guitar Center customers were used to that. They were used to that shopping experience, to being able to come in and be like, no, come on. I know you can give me a better deal than that. I know you can get. And we got put into a position where when people were doing that, we would have to escalate it to either me, the customer service manager, or the store manager, which became really awkward for the customers.
Well, how many of those did you turn down though? Like, I mean, we're like on the average.
We would walk deals.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. And it was just because like they started a big push on the margin, right? And so this was also about the time they started really messing with the commission structures and how the salespeople were getting paid, right?
Right.
So it changed to where like
I remember when this happened. By the way,
I remember if they got rid of because you got a percentage of sales and a percentage of margin.
Hey, hold up a sec, Trent. I think I know where you're going, Adam. I'm assuming you got an influx of applications.
We got an influx of Insta hires.
Okay, continue, Trent.
So that's when they really started pushing on that, and then the commission structures changed. And I mean, I haven't been with Guitar Center for almost 6 years now, so you'll have to forgive me on some of this. I might not remember, but the commission structures changed. They sold it to everybody as a way for, oh, you can really make more money with it this way and da-da-da-da-da. And that ended up not being the case for a lot of people.
If I'm not mistaken, most stores are strictly hourly now.
Well, eventually that was the shift.
Right.
Was to, we're getting rid of commission Now all this change is taking place as I'm a customer service manager, and I'm training to be a store manager, right? But Steve, I came up, you know, a while back, really in the culture of that company. It was a while back, it was a different culture.
Right.
So I had the whole time this idea in my head of what it was going to be like to be a store manager, right? I came up with very proactive store managers. Like J-Bell was always on the floor.
Yes, he was.
You know what I mean? He was very proactive. He would help, he knew I was new. If he knew I needed help with something, if he knew maybe I was dealing with a customer that he knew was difficult, like he would come in and he would help me out.
Yes, he would.
And he was very proactive in training. Like that's one thing that like I feel like my training prepared me to better be a salesperson than what I feel like we were training people toward the end of my career was to be cashiers that maybe knew a little bit. They weren't
clerks.
They weren't as focused on the gear knowledge as what it was when I came up.
I will say, and Trent, I think you'll agree with me, the certification program was great.
Dude, it was awesome.
That was top tier.
And that ended up morphing into something that became really great as a training tool. Like there was cool modules on the computer you could do. Like there was always gear modules coming out for all the new gear where they were like little videos from the manufacturer and like telling you about like that ended up becoming, that was something they did that, yeah, it was great. Like that kind of thing was fantastic. But as it shifted from such a focus on sales, you started losing all those OGs, the vets that were the guys that had the guys that really were the backbone of the store's sales.
Yeah, because at that point, your top salespeople were taking a pay cut.
Yes.
What that's I wasn't even in Guitar Center, and I knew that's what was happening. They were trying to beef up the low producers to keep them, to lower the turnover, and they were at the expense of the top producers,
i.e. Cheney Brandon.
i.e. Cheney Brandon, Rob Wodarczyk. I mean, I gotta listen. I'm sure, I don't know who wants to be named or anything like that, but let's just say that there was a lot of folks that the locals gained by virtue of that commission, that change. And I wasn't even working there, and I remember hearing about that.
There's something that was mentioned here that I think carries over, and you heard me say this when I was working with you, Adam, is if you can't tech it, you shouldn't sell it, right? And that strictly came from, you were not allowed to sell out of certain departments at GC until you hit a certain level of certification and you knew what you needed to know. And that is one thing that at that point in time, GC was doing fantastic. And these black shirts, I have so many of these because I had to go through it all. Right. And what would happen is every time you got quote unquote certified, they send you a shirt and they sent you a lanyard. Right. But the key was, if you did not hit a certain level on these things, basically, if you didn't get all A's, you weren't allowed to go to Pro Audio and sell. You weren't allowed to sell out of drums. You weren't allowed to sell, if you were in Pro Audio, you couldn't sell a guitar. That was the way it was. And
those were not easy either.
No, that shit was fucking hard, man. When you got the Pro Audio.
Yeah.
I took one of those, and it was not as I was a Pro Audio guy, and it was not.
No, it's not. And that was the thing that disturbed me about our location, Adam, was you've got somebody who's trying to run over everybody and sell everything under the fucking sun, but if they called and asked that person for guidance, they'd have to turn it over to somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, that's, and that's the, I don't want to say the struggle. It is the struggle. It's the struggle when you work in a smaller operation. It's the struggle. And when I say smaller, I mean, you're still talking about, at the time I was working there, $15 million a year operation. It wasn't like, a mom and pop shop necessarily, but when the whole premise of that is that owners and, managers have less people to manage, less people to pay. So, and if it's not broken in their eyes, why would you fix it? This person is selling at a good clip. Who cares, whatever else? Who cares what bodies are left in the wake?
But
as long as
they're doing it. That if a phone call went up the chain saying that this person, after they sold something and there was a negative response to them reaching out to this person for any kind of support, all of a sudden that flips a little bit, right?
Yeah, but Steve, I think that, like, what does it really equate to? It equates to
exactly.
They roll their eyes and they say, oh, here's, Johnny Do-Gooder, who's, selling guitars, but they're a band and orchestra person. And they took a return on a guitar because it was out of tune, or they sold a guitar with a broken headstock and they didn't know. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where when the person who signs the checks, when the person who is, their name is on the door, so
Correct.
to speak, right? Mr. Guitar Center wasn't rolling through, but like in our case, the guy who signed the checks, he could show up at any moment. Time. When you have that dynamic, there's a lot of eye rolling. There's a lot of like, okay, well, this person, the leash is very long. If you can sell, if you are producing for the company, and this is true in corporate, world too. I mean, I'm sure Trent and you can talk all day about people who got away with probably everything leading up to actual murder in stores, and because they produced, because they sold. I mean, I've watched people. I watched an employee lie to me. Who I was supposedly the preeminent store manager in the company. I watched an employee lie and scream and throw things at me in front of ownership. And they weren't going to do anything because this person was a top producer. It's, if you're bringing in dollars, the sacrificial lamb is everyone else.
Correct. And we'll touch on this subject a little bit later, but to your point, when something gets returned and they neg you with return and they take a sale. But for some positive stuff, Iris says, you guys worked in a place where you have common interests with coworkers. Did that feel much different to other retail where there isn't a common interest? Yes. I would say the most positive thing about all of our experiences, period. It doesn't matter if it went sour or if you didn't leave on the terms you wanted to or anything like that. The one thing I think we all have in common here, and you guys can correct me, is it was an absolute joy to work in a building with people who had the same passion for the things that you did. Correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
it gives everyone something to talk about. It gives everything. If the conversation ever gets weird or political or something, it always gives you something to circle back to. And that is so important when you spend more time with these people than you do your own family. Like, yeah, you can't all be there. Nobody grows up wants to sling gear. Nobody wants to grow up and sell pots. You know what I mean? But if you're going to sell something that you like, in this case, guitars, drums, music equipment, it's kind of the best case scenario.
Yeah. I mean, would you both not agree that when times are good, because look, all businesses go through ups and downs. All right. That just happens. But when times are good and you're working, and I think it's kind of specific to musicians, the only other place I could see it being similar is like if you're a crafter and you work for like Joann's, Michael's, or Hobby Lobby. That's the only thing I really can kind of equate it to.
Yeah.
There's a magic about working around the things you love. And, you know, I've said this before on different episodes, you know, you find yourself in a headspace where everybody else in any kind of selling business, retail or whatnot, dreads truck day. But if you're in this business and this is what you're passionate about, truck days are like Christmas. It's like, what new cool shit are we getting? And it's really hard to convey that to people. People just really don't understand unless they've been in it. And, you know, like, it's kind of appropriate. We're doing this right now, and it's NAMM.
Oh,
NAMM.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's NAMM.
Yeah, NAMM's going on right now in LA. And, you know, there's that like, ooh, tingling feeling when you're sitting at a computer at your job, looking at the NAMM feed to see what's coming and wondering if the boss is going to bring it in the store because it's cool and you want to try it out. And the one thing I give Guitar Center credit, a lot of credit for was, when did they, Gain? Trent, when did they get rid of Gain?
Dude, I think even when I let go, Gain was still a thing, to be honest with you.
Right. All right. Adam, are you familiar with what Gain was for GC? All right.
No.
Gain was a program for employees that, you know, you could go in and look, and it was kind of like a marketplace. Basically what it was deep discount deals on new gear that was coming out. Okay. And what would happen is the whole concept was, if a Guitar Center employee got this super stellar deal on something, and we're talking like some of these deals were below what you would get as an employee discount. Okay. I mean, like really, really good deals.
Yeah.
And with the point of, you get this merchandise, you're excited about this merchandise, and the payoff is you go sell that merchandise. That is something that GC did that was absolutely amazing. Now, look, I know Behringer is a very touchy subject with a lot of people. Okay. But when Behringer released their first set of studio monitors that had ribbon tweeters in them, knocking off the atoms, I got a pair of those, and they were 8-inch speakers. I got a pair of those for $100. At retail, they were like almost $200 a piece. That's what GC had there for a while to get people excited about this stuff. And you know, to your point, Adam, I know where your head would kind of, it was a big corporation. They had the power to be able to do that. Okay. They had the financing and they had the agreements and whatnot.
500 stores to 5
exactly.
A ratio.
So that's not lost on me. But if you have a company, and that's the sad thing about Guitar Center, look, we can say whatever we want to about competition. Guitar Center has just kind of like fallen off for quite a while. And, you know, they went through bankruptcy and they kind of came out of it. And I'm just going to go on record and say here, the GC here locally is awful. I would only go there to get strings, to be honest with you. So
I've abandoned one here in Peoria for, a long time.
Have you been in the one up there, Adam?
Man, I haven't been, not since I moved back. I think the last time I was in that store was maybe 7 years ago, something like that. But Delaware's tax-free, so it remains pretty busy. But I haven't.
So you moved back to Delaware, correct? So how many do you have Sam Ash there at all?
No, the nearest Sam Ash to me is an hour plus.
Wow.
In Plymouth. Meeting.
Well, Sam Ash was nothing in the Atlanta market. That was garbage.
Oh yeah, I know that. I will say this: of all the music stores I've been to, the Sam Ash and I don't know anybody that works there anymore, so I don't feel bad saying this, was the most disgusting retail establishment. Like
Was
from a
it not?
cleanliness
It
standpoint,
was,
I had
oh,
ever
it was
been.
always awful. It's been like that for like a decade, Adam. That store was nasty as shit.
I had scouted that store. I mean, so many times, and I got to
Well,
tell you, I don't know how anyone let that slide. I don't know how
oh,
anyone let that
you
slide.
mentioned something that as a store manager and even as a customer service manager, but scouting the competition,
Ooh.
that was a whole thing too.
Well, what kind of
Yeah,
what
that was
what kind of competition did you have in Peoria?
A very well established mom and pop shop,
Right.
Florida Music. That
What was the name of it?
Florey's Music.
Where?
It's in Peoria, Illinois.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the name of it?
Oh,
Sorry.
Florey's Music. Flores.
Right.
Flores. What? But
Mhm.
they've been here, 50 plus years, right? And they carry things that the inventory system changed at one point to where you used to, like Steve said, you'd be like, oh, you talk to your store manager, hey, can we get this piece of gear in so we can try it and da 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 da. And you used to be able, there was a point where you could just kind of request gear.
Yep.
And you could get it to your store. But there came a point when that stopped and this new inventory system rolled out. And it really downsized a lot of what I was in Peoria, a smaller market. I was in Des Moines, which a medium-sized market, but, we weren't carrying the cool high-end pieces that people were excited about. You know what I mean? Like Guitar Center didn't carry Mesa Boogie amps. When I was with them, I'm sorry, did carry them, but they were only allocated. It got to a point where they were only allocated to very specific stores,
right?
In large markets, pretty much only exclusively. So, like a small store like Peoria, there was no way we could get. It got to a point where there was no way where we could get like a cool dual rectifier half stack, even like the head and a 212 cab.
Oh, do you remember my full stack wall?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was dope. Anyway, continue.
But, the competition, however, they carried all the cool Mesa Boogie shit. They had all the cool Ibanez Prestige guitars. They had PRS guitars. Like, they carried everything that we couldn't carry. Stuff that we couldn't even get if we wanted to. That they just wouldn't to our stuff.
That was the strategy with some of those brands, though, is that they would go, like, they saw what GC did to Fender, and then started to kind of put their fingers into some of the indie stores.
Mesa Boogie had a deal where there could only be one dealer, or like so many dealers
per county.
Yep.
So like Florey's had the Mesa Boogie dealership. There was no way that we could get it.
To your point, Adam, you're 100% right. You're going down the debt train there. Yes, we know what GC did to Fender. All right. And look, say what you want to about the gear, but how bad does it look that at some point in time, Behringer says, you're not selling our shit? Think about that for a minute, and now, if I'm not mistaken, now there's no PRS, there's no Mesa. The local GC here, half the guitar wall is empty. Okay. And so, go ahead, Trent.
It became so focused on proprietary gear. Like there became a point
Laguna
late in the time when Laguna is what started it. But then it was Harbinger for pro equipment, right? Yeah. And then there was Mitchell guitars.
No, Mitchell predated Laguna. Mitchell had always been a GC brand.
Right. Well, they had never got
Well, and they weren't the only one. No, to Trent's point, they weren't the only ones too, because then you had Carlo Ribelli was Ash's brand. You had
everybody kind of had their own thing.
Right, they did. They had everybody had in band and orchestra. John Baptiste was the big thing for Smash.
Like later in the later points of my career, like when we'd be having the big sales of the year, like the Memorial Day sale was always a real big one. Labor Day sale was always a real big one. You know what I mean? Black Friday, like all those deals for those sales. Customers might get a 10 or 15% off coupon if they're lucky, or the deals are on
private label shit.
Quite frankly, the shitty proprietary gear.
Right, private label. Cause GC bought Simmons, correct?
Yeah.
All right, so you had Simmons.
Yeah, those Simmons.
You had
drum.
Mitchell.
They had an acoustic.
Acoustic
drum kit too.
Oh. I've got the best one, Trent. I got the best one. You ready? When they tried to revive fucking Delta Labs.
Oh, yeah, with the effects pedals. Those were terrible.
Although, I will say, their version of the Tube Screamer was a direct knockoff of the TS-808. I will say that.
Yeah. For the most part, most of that gear was pretty awful.
Raven amplifiers.
Raven amps. I got so many virtual drum set deals from people just going to play Simmons drums. Like they would just go. They would come into the shop. Oh, why is this Roland so expensive? I can get a Simmons. Go ahead. See you in 28 days when you return it to Guitar Center.
Yeah.
And come back and get.
All right. So there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think we all would love to address. So let me get these out of the way real quick. All right. So Irish Connection. Just curious. I know nothing about music retail. What kind of money do people drop there? Was a few hundred a normal sale, or most sales strings and plucks? Boy, do we have a story for you. And then Brent asked, what kind of quality did a private label guitar have versus a national brand? So who wants to take question number one from Irish?
Well, okay.
I'll take.
What was it again?
Just curious, what kind of money do people drop there?
Oh,
these are fishing stories.
I'll let Adam do. Let Adam do this one because he's got brass, and he's when you get in the band instruments, that's next level.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So think of it this way: if you have during what we call rental season. Now in Georgia, this was like August sometime. So what we would do is your average horn. So your horns are broken into three tiers. Your instruments, right? Your saxophones, trumpets, trombones, things like that. Your middle schoolers are going to rent. That's fine. Whatever. No big deal, right? Your high schoolers. I mean, it was like, I think somebody said in the chat, it's like fish in a barrel. The band directors tell the kids they have to get these things. They say, you're a good player now. You have to get X, Y, and Z. And the parents come into the store like this is their homework. Like, I got to get this thing. You know what I mean? It's like the new backpack. I know for a fact I had twin sisters that were juniors in high school, both music major bound. One was a saxophone player, one was a French horn player. And so, and I say this for Irish Connection, like this wasn't like something that people came in and said, I want to buy a nice horn because I feel like it. This was like they were told they had to do it. That was $10,000 out the door. And so you figure if I'm selling on an average August or so, a normal, month for me, if I could get my whole team around $10,000 to $15,000 a month, that was great. If I sold less than 45 to 60,000 just in that month, that was a disappointment. So if you're in the right place, I was in the right store for that. I would go from, I would have a fraction of the inventory. Steve, you remember my entire store was, I don't know, 35, maybe 2,500 square feet.
Not selling space, but yeah.
Right, not selling space. I would go from out of like 60 salespeople, I would go from about 20 to 25 on my best month. 11 months of the year. During August, I would easily go to number 1, 2, or 3. So in terms of the money people drop, depending on what you want, guitars, a few $100, I'm feeling pretty good about that. But when you got into the band and orchestra, I mean, yeah, if you let someone walk for less than 2,500, you missed an opportunity.
Yeah, Irish. It's big. The business is big money, and even from a guitar standpoint, if you're in a guitar-driven market, I will tell you, in my heyday when Guitar Center was going on with Guitar Hero, when all that was done, it was not uncommon. And Trent, I think you will confirm, it was not uncommon to sell a couple of $1,000 guitars a day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was crazy.
Lenny, Steve.
Oh, Lenny. Oh, yeah. Let me tell the story. All right. So if you're a musician and you do watch this, this was some of the cool stuff that Guitar Center did. Guitar Center, for one, owns a lot of iconic guitars. So do they own Lenny and they gave it out to Fender to reproduce? Is that correct? Trent?
Yes, I think they had bought it off of his wife.
Right. They own Lenny. They own the SRV #1. They own
Blackie.
They own Blackie from Eric Clapton. So Guitar Center's sitting on these iconic guitars from all kinds of music. They own this shit. So the coolest,
like Jimmy Page's #2 Les Paul or something like that.
Yeah. And the coolest thing that ever fucking happened was Fender did a run of Stevie Ray Vaughan's Lenny guitar reproductions. And
the SRVs.
Yeah. And what happened was the Fender rep came around to the stores with the real Lenny. And now if you're a guitar player worth your salt and you know who the fuck Stevie Ray Vaughan is, and they bring you this guitar, and I got to sit down and play Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar.